Picture this. It's 1606. You're standing at the foot of a scaffold. Above you is a man who barely looks human anymore. His legs are ruined, crushed into useless pulp after weeks on the rack. He can't climb. The executioner has to drag him up the ladder, step by step. He's the last of 4 traitors scheduled to die today. The crowd is restless, loud, hungry. They aren't here for closure. They're here for spectacle. They want to see him cut open while he's still alive. This is the brutal, unromantic reality behind the true story of Guy Fawkes. Now watch closely. As the noose is placed around his neck, something strange happens. The broken man doesn't wait for the executioner's signal. He doesn't wait for the push. Somehow, he summons one last flash of strength. He stares out into the void and throws himself off the ladder. Snap. Before we dive into the conspiracy that nearly erased the British government, take a second to like and subscribe if you enjoy uncovering the hidden mechanics of history. And let me know in the comments, do you think history is shaped more by powerful leaders or by desperate rebels? That sound you just heard, the snap, was Guy Fawkes cheating the system. In that final instant, by leaping to his death, he denied the king what he really wanted. To understand why that mattered, you need to understand the alternative. His sentence wasn't just death. It was hanging, drawing, and quartering, an assembly line of agony. The executioner would hang the victim just long enough for them to lose consciousness. Then they'd be cut down, revived with cold water. That's when the real work began. A blade to the abdomen. Intestines pulled out and burned while the victim watched. The heart torn from the chest. Fawkes had already watched 3 friends die this way. He saw the steam rise from their bodies. He knew exactly what was coming. But Fawkes was a soldier, not a martyr. Even with his body wrecked, joints dislocated, muscles torn, his mind was still calculating. The state wanted a show, so he gave them a corpse. The fall snapped his neck instantly. The crowd groaned in disappointment. The executioner was furious. They still hacked his body into 4 pieces and displayed them on the city gates. But the pain, the point of the punishment, was gone. This wasn't just suicide. It was a final tactical maneuver. So how did we get here? How did a man from a respectable Yorkshire family end up broken on a scaffold, hated by millions? To answer that, we have to ignore the masks and the fireworks. We have to look past the man holding the match and focus on the one who lit the fuse. The figure history almost forgot. Robert Catesby. History loves remembering the actor and forgetting the director. Every November, we burn effigies of Guy Fawkes. But if you'd walked into a London tavern on a rainy night in 1604, Fawkes would have been in the corner. The man everyone revolved around, the dark sun at the center of the room, was Robert Catesby. Catesby was everything a government fears: wealthy, educated, charismatic. Contemporary accounts describe a man who could convince you to walk into a fire and thank him for the warmth. He stood over 6 feet tall, in an era where most men barely reached 5.5. He was a skilled swordsman, but his most dangerous weapon wasn't steel. It was grievance. To understand the rage behind the Gunpowder Plot, you have to look at Catesby's finances. Under King James I, being Catholic in England was a slow, expensive death. The crown had a specific weapon for people like him: recusancy fines. If you refused to attend Church of England services, you paid, heavily, £20 a month. In modern terms, that's roughly £5,000 every single month. For years, Catesby's father paid those fines. bleeding the family fortune dry to protect his conscience. When Robert inherited the estate, he inherited the debt and the anger. But money wasn't the breaking point. Hope was. When Queen Elizabeth died in 1603, Catholics across England held their breath. Her successor, King James, was the son of Mary, Queen of Scots, a Catholic martyr. They believed he would save them, that the fines would end. Catesby believed it too. He was wrong. James didn't ease the pressure, he refined it. He publicly promised tolerance for Catholics who stayed quiet, then aggressively increased fines to refill the royal treasury. Catholic priests were banished under threat of death. For Catesby, this wasn't policy, it was betrayal. The new king wasn't a savior. He was a parasite, feeding on Catesby's legacy. Most men would have fled to France or Spain. Catesby wasn't most men. He possessed a cold, burning fanaticism. He realized reform was a lie. The system wasn't broken. It was working exactly as intended. So in early 1604, Catesby invited his cousin Thomas Wintour to his lodgings in Lambeth. The room was dim, curtains drawn. Catesby didn't shout. He didn't rant. He spoke with the calm of a man who had already accepted his own death. He proposed something so absolute that Wintour recoiled in horror. They wouldn't just kill the king. Kings could be replaced. Catesby wanted to erase the entire English government in one stroke. King, lords, bishops, commons, all gathered in one room for the opening of Parliament. In that place, Catesby reportedly said, "Have they done us all the mischief? And perchance God hath designed that place for their punishment." He wanted to blow them all back to hell. But there was a problem. Catesby was a visionary, a strategist, a leader. He was not a soldier. He didn't understand explosives. He didn't know siege warfare. And to turn a stone palace into dust, he needed someone who did. He needed a specialist. A man who'd spent the last decade knee-deep in mud and blood, blowing fortifications apart for the Spanish army. He needed Guido. If Catesby was the architect, Guy Fawkes was the demolition expert. And this is where the popular image collapses. Fawkes wasn't a cackling madman. He wasn't chaos incarnate. That's a dangerous mistake. The man Thomas Wintour found in April 1604 wasn't a lunatic. He was a professional soldier, cool, disciplined, lethally competent. Born in York in 1570, Fawkes didn't start as a radical. His father was a Protestant church official. But after his father died, his mother remarried a staunch Catholic recusant. Young Guy was exposed to the underground world of the old faith. The fines, the secrecy, the fear. Something hardened. At 21, he sold his inheritance and went to war. Not for England. He crossed into the Spanish Netherlands to fight for the Catholic Spanish army against Protestant rebels. For 10 years, Fawkes lived in sieges, not glory, engineering. He learned sapping, how to tunnel beneath fortifications, how to pack gunpowder into confined spaces, how black powder behaved in damp air, exactly how much was needed to bring stone down. He became so immersed in this new identity that he stopped calling himself Guy. He became Guido. When Wintour found him, likely in Ostend, Guido was a man without a country, a mercenary known for piety and calm resolve. Wintour didn't explain everything at first. He only said they needed someone with special skills for the Catholic cause in England. Fawkes didn't hesitate. He packed his kit, and when they returned to London, Guido Fawkes stopped being a man. He became a weapon. Fawkes returned to England under an alias, John Johnson. Officially, he was just a servant to Thomas Percy. In reality, He was the ghost in the machine, the silent operator who would turn Robert Catesby's nightmare into something real. The original plan wasn't elegant. It was brutal and primitive. They intended to dig. Catesby and his circle rented a house close to Parliament. From there, they planned to tunnel directly beneath the House of Lords. It was backbreaking, dangerous work. Thick medieval stone, constant noise, water seeping in from the Thames. Any mistake could expose them instantly. This is where Fawkes mattered. He wasn't just muscle. He was a mining engineer. He knew how to swing a pick in near silence, how to brace a tunnel, how to judge stone by feel. The rest of the conspirators, mostly well-born gentlemen, had never done a day of real labor in their lives. Fawkes became their foreman. For months they dug, inch by inch. The walls were nearly 9 feet thick. Their hands blistered. Morale collapsed. They were clawing at history with iron and hope. Then, by sheer luck, everything changed. They heard footsteps above them. Fawkes went to investigate. What he found was astonishing. A ground-floor undercroft, a storage cellar directly beneath the House of Lords. The tenant was moving out. They abandoned the tunnel immediately. Thomas Percy, using his status as a gentleman pensioner, leased the cellar. Just like that, they didn't need to dig anymore. They had rented the perfect bomb casing. Now came the real danger. Over the following months, under cover of darkness, the conspirators ferried 36 barrels of gunpowder across the Thames and through London's streets. They stacked them in the cellar and hid them beneath firewood and coal. This alone should have been impossible. Gunpowder was a state-controlled monopoly. Yet somehow, they acquired over 2.5 tons of it without triggering alarms. Fawkes knew the risks weren't just political, they were chemical. Black powder in 1605 wasn't stable. It was serpentine powder, prone to separating. Sulfur sank, charcoal rose, damp air could render it useless. Fawkes constantly inspected the barrels, turning them, checking them, keeping the mixture alive in the cold stone cellar. Assume the powder stayed dry. Assume the mixture was perfect. What would have happened? Modern physicists have run the numbers. Fawkes had stockpiled roughly 2,500 kilograms of black powder. Less powerful than modern explosives, but sheer volume changes everything. The blast would have been equivalent to around 1.5 tons of TNT. The cellar was a confined stone box. When ignited, pressure would spike instantly. The walls would act like the barrel of a massive cannon, directing force straight upward. Within milliseconds, the floor of the House of Lords would vanish. The king, the lords, the bishops, vaporized by a thermal wave thousands of degrees hot. Then the shock wave. Stone blocks the size of carts would tear outward at supersonic speed. Westminster Abbey's windows would shatter. Buildings would collapse within a 50-meter radius. The blast would be heard miles away. The air itself would be ripped from lungs in Old Palace Yard. It wouldn't have been an assassination. It would have been the decapitation of the English state. Fawkes slept next to this weapon. He checked his watch, a rare luxury, counting down the hours. He was ready to end the world. But while Fawkes calculated fuse times in the dark, another calculation was unfolding in the light. At Whitehall Palace, Robert Cecil was watching. If Catesby was the heart and Fawkes the hand, Cecil was the eye. Physically unimpressive, barely 5 feet tall, hunched by a curved spine, Cecil was mocked relentlessly. Even King James affectionately called him his little beagle. That was a mistake. Cecil hunted secrets. As Secretary of State, he built the most advanced surveillance network in Europe. Merchants, dock workers, priests, double agents, letters opened and resealed with flawless wax, spies embedded even within the Jesuit order. This raises the most controversial question of the entire story. Did Cecil already know? Some historians believe the Gunpowder Plot wasn't a surprise. It was a trap. That Cecil knew something was brewing and allowed it to progress. Not because he wanted Parliament destroyed, but because he wanted Catholics discredited forever. To crush a movement, you need a monster. The anomalies are hard to ignore. The conspirators rented a cellar beneath Parliament without issue. They moved massive quantities of gunpowder through London. Known agitators operated freely. It's possible Cecil watched everything and waited. Then came the mistake. In a world of persecuted men, loyalty cracks. Someone, either a conspirator or a fearful associate, panicked. They couldn't bear the thought of a specific Catholic lord dying. So they wrote a letter. On October 26, 1605, Lord Monteagle received an anonymous warning. The handwriting was disguised. The message was chilling. They shall receive a terrible blow this Parliament, and yet they shall not see who hurts them. Monteagle didn't hesitate. He rode straight to Whitehall and handed the letter to Cecil. The conspirators knew immediately. Panic set in. Suspicion fell on Francis Tresham, Monteagle's brother-in-law. He denied everything, so convincingly that Catesby hesitated. That hesitation doomed them. Catesby convinced himself the letter was too vague to matter. He ordered the plan to continue. To be safe, he sent Fawkes back to check the cellar. On October 30th, Fawkes inspected the barrels. Nothing had been disturbed. He reported all was well. It wasn't. On November 4th, the Lord Chamberlain conducted a routine inspection of Parliament's cellars. Fawkes stood guard, posing as John Johnson, calm, unflinching. They questioned the firewood. Fawkes answered cleanly. The inspectors left. Fawkes believed he'd won. That night, he returned to the cellar anyway. He refused to flee. A soldier finishes his post. Just after midnight on November 5th, the door burst open. This time it was real. Sir Thomas Knivet and armed men stormed the cellar. Fawkes fought, but numbers overwhelmed him. They bound him with his own garters. In his pockets, slow matches, touchwood, a watch. Behind the firewood, 36 barrels of gunpowder. When asked if he regretted it, Fawkes said his only regret was failing to blow them all to pieces. He was dragged through London to the King's chambers, dirty, defiant, unbowed. The interrogation shocked the court. Fawkes was insolent, proud. When asked why he did it, he said, "Desperate diseases require dangerous remedies." When asked why so much gunpowder, he looked the king in the eye and said, "To blow you back to your Scotch mountains." He refused to name names. That wouldn't last. King James signed the warrant. The gentler tortures first, and so by degrees to the worst. Fawkes was taken to the Tower, and there the state went to work. The Tower of London is a fortress of stone. For John Johnson, it became a universe of pain. He was handed over to Sir William Waad, the lieutenant of the Tower, a man who despised Catholics with bureaucratic devotion. Waad didn't see Fawkes as a human being. He saw a problem, and the king's warrant gave him permission to solve it with medieval engineering. For the first 2 days, Fawkes endured what were politely called the gentler tortures. This likely meant the manacles. His wrists were chained high on the wall, his feet barely touching the ground. The body's own weight did the work. Shoulders strained, chest muscles locked. Breathing became labor. Fawkes said nothing. Through November 6th and 7th, he admitted his faith. He admitted the plot. but he named no one. Every hour of silence bought his comrades time to flee north. Silence, however, always comes at a cost. On November 7th, King James lost patience. He ordered Waad to proceed to the worst. Fawkes was taken deeper into the tower where the rack waited. The rack was simple and merciless. A wooden frame, rollers at each end, ankles tied to one, wrists to the other. As the handles turned, the ropes tightened, muscles stretched, ligaments screamed, then joints failed, hips dislocated, vertebrae separated. This wasn't an explosion, it was slow destruction. We don't know how long Fawkes was on the rack, but we have proof of what it did. 2 signatures survive. The first, signed before the torture, reads Guido. It's strong, clean, defiant. The second, signed on November 8th, is barely legible. A trembling scrawl. His shoulders were likely torn apart. He couldn't hold the quill. He signed it Guy Fawkes. The Guido was gone. He broke. The human body has limits. Eventually, the need for the pain to stop overrides everything else. Fawkes whispered the names. Catesby, Wintour, Percy, all of them. The tragedy is that it no longer mattered. While Fawkes was being dismantled in the tower, royal forces were already closing in on Holbeche House in the Midlands. The rest of the conspirators were finished. Robert Catesby had always known this would end in blood. He wasn't going to be taken alive. For 3 days, the fugitives rode hard through rain and mud, exhausted, wet. But the worst blow wasn't the weather. It was the silence. Catesby believed Catholics would rise when Parliament fell. They didn't. Doors stayed shut. Friends turned them away. Even family members refused to help. Fear won. On the night of November 7th, they reached Holbeche House. The sheriff's men were close. And then came history's cruelest irony. They had brought gunpowder for a last stand, but it had gotten soaked crossing a river. In their exhaustion, they spread it near a fire to dry. An ember jumped. The room erupted in flame. It didn't destroy the house, but it burned Catesby badly. His face blistered, his hands scorched. He looked at his men and understood. This was judgment. On the morning of November 8th, the sheriff's posse surrounded the house. They thought they were cornering thieves. Catesby and his companions opened the doors themselves. They wanted a soldier's death. The fight was short and violent. The Wright brothers fell first. Then Catesby and Thomas Percy stood together under musket fire. One shot, an impossible stroke of chance, passed through Percy and struck Catesby. Both men fell from the same bullet. Catesby crawled back inside, clutching a picture of the Virgin Mary. He died moments later. The mastermind was dead. He escaped the rack. He escaped trial. The king would not allow him peace. Catesby's body was exhumed. His head was severed and placed on a pike outside Parliament. He would watch forever over the building he failed to destroy. Back in London, Guy Fawkes waited. In January 1606, he was dragged back to the scaffold, broken, barely able to stand. He knew exactly what awaited him, and at the last possible moment, he denied them. By jumping, he turned torture into execution. The state lost its spectacle. England celebrated. The king survived. Thanksgiving became law. Bonfires were lit every November 5th. At first, they burned effigies of the Pope. This wasn't a party, it was a warning. Over time, the hatred softened. Bonfire night became family tradition. Fireworks, hot drinks, a straw man called the Guy. Then, centuries later, something strange happened. A comic book, V for Vendetta, resurrected a face. The stylized Guy Fawkes mask became a symbol of rebellion. Protesters wore it. Hackers adopted it. The man who wanted a Catholic theocracy became an icon of anti-authoritarian freedom. That is history's supreme irony. Guy Fawkes was not a Democrat. He was not a libertarian. If he had succeeded, England might have traded one oppressive regime for another. And yet, we remember him. Why? Because humans are drawn to the great refusal, to the lone figure standing against the state. We forget the fanaticism and remember the resolve. We forget the intended mass murder and remember the man who refused to break until his body was literally pulled apart. Guy Fawkes became a mirror. When we look at that mask, we don't see 1605. We see our own frustrations with power, surveillance, and authority. We project ourselves onto a man who's been dead for 4 centuries. So the next time fireworks bloom over the skyline, remember the broken man on the scaffold. Remember the Roman resolution, and remember the truth. History isn't a fairy tale of heroes and villains. It's a tragedy of perspective. Guy Fawkes failed to destroy Parliament, but he succeeded in something more enduring. He embedded himself in our collective memory, a permanent splinter in the mind of the establishment. A reminder that beneath the floorboards of power, there is always a fuse. The only question is, who holds the match next time? If this deep dive changed how you see Guy Fawkes, destroy that like button. Figuratively. Subscribe for more documentaries that strip away the myths of history. And let me know in the comments. In today's world, is Guy Fawkes a terrorist or a freedom fighter? Thanks for watching.